Good afternoon. I'm Paul McMonagle from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us for the March 2024 Connect and Communicate Series session. This discussion will be recorded and it will be made available to Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division members through the PALA website, as well as sent to registrants and available on the CRD blog. For this discussion, you will only need a headset or speakers. We encourage you to ask questions in a chat box at the bottom of the screen during a discussion, and we'll attempt to include your questions as appropriate during the discussion or at the end, however Peter wants to do it. And we'll also do our best to assist participants with technical issues. Please post those in the chat box as well. And just want to let you know this session is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Library Association College and Research Division's Connect and Communicate series. I'd like to thank the CRD board for supporting this initiative and the other planning committee members. And I'm going to read off their names, but I'm horrible with last names. So I'm just going to say they're Adam, Ronali, Christy, Andrea, and Amy. Please contact any one of the team for information about becoming a PALA member if you're not already. This project is made possible by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services as administered by the Pennsylvania Department of Education through the Office of Commonwealth Libraries and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with Josh Shapiro as governor. And finally, most importantly, I'd like to thank our presenter for today's event, who I am now going to turn all this over to.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'll just add, we'll start by saying, as far as questions, I hope to have some time at the end for questions. So please do feel free to post questions in the chat during the presentation. But if what I'd like to do is talk about those at the end of the presentation. I think that works best for the flow of the presentation. So the title of my presentation is Federal Legal Research for General Academic Librarians. My name is Peter Egler. I'm the head of Owen Library at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. Okay, let me see. There we go. Okay. Just a little about me to let you know where I'm coming from. I graduated from undergrad in 85, and then I went right to law school. Got out of law school in 88. From 88 until 97, I worked as an attorney at my family's law firm in Pittsburgh. In 95, I went back to school at night at the University of Pittsburgh, got my library science degree in 97. From 97 until 2002, I worked at the Sacramento County Public Law Library in Sacramento, California. From 2002 to 2007, I worked at the University of Houston's Law School Library in Houston, Texas. From 2008 until 2018, I worked at Drexel University's Law School in Philadelphia. And since 2018, I've had the honor of working at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. The reason I go through that is to give you an idea of where I'm coming from and what experience I've had. I've had significant experience as an academic law librarian, but I've also had experience as a general academic librarian. My idea for this presentation was to create a presentation that would make federal legal research available and approachable for general academic librarians. You could teach an entire semester-long class on federal legal research. I've taught semester-long classes on Pennsylvania legal research, actually. But the goal of this presentation today is to, yes, here it is. Goals for this presentation today is to provide an overview of the federal legal research process, identify the types of information involved, and highlight useful information resources. Okay. Just scope of the presentation. This presentation will provide an overview of federal legal research, review federal legal research resources, review subscription-based and free electronic resources. Things this presentation will not do, it will not provide a comprehensive review of federal legal research. That would be impossible in 1 hour. And we will not discuss any print resources. Print resources are still useful for historical research, historical I'll just use the term research for historical research, but that's outside the scope of this presentation. All federal legal research at this point can be and should be done using electronic resources. Okay, now to start with the presentation. In order to understand, for legal research, in order to understand researching the laws of a jurisdiction, you need to understand the structure of a you need to understand the structure of a jurisdiction. So the United States federal government, like every government in the United States, has three branches. First, there's the legislative branch, which is comprised of the United States Congress. Second is the executive branch, which is comprised of the president and administrative agencies. And third is the judicial branch, which is comprised of the U.S. court system. One overly simplistic but useful way to talk about how these three work together is the legislative branch is seen as making the laws. The executive branch is seen as enforcing the laws, especially through the administrative agencies. And the judicial branch is seen as interpreting the law. So we're going to take a look at each of these branches individually and see how we'll take a look at each branch individually and see the different types of legal research information that they create. Excuse me for a second. So the first branch we'll look at is the legislative branch. Again, that's comprised of the U.S. Congress, the House and the Senate. In order to understand researching the legislative branch, so researching the legislative branch involves researching the federal laws. In order to understand researching federal laws, you need to have some understanding of the federal legislative process. I created a document which I think gives a good overview of the federal legislative process, and I'd like to review that now. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing the slides, and then I want to move over to there's a packet of documents I've created which will be shared with everyone after the presentation. So everything we're about to talk about, if you're taking notes, you don't need to write this down. These documents will be shared with everyone after the presentation. So here's the overview of the federal legislative process. So I'll just start. And as you can see, I've divided this up by steps. So this is the process of creating federal laws. Step number one, a federal legislator introduces a bill into Congress with either the House or the Senate. You see, I've highlighted in yellow this step. The reason I highlighted this step and all the other steps that are highlighted in yellow is that there's information created during this step, which is useful to someone who's researching a particular law, researching the legislative history of a particular law. In step number one here, the information created is the text of the law set forth in the bill. The text of the law may change and probably will change as it goes through Congress. We'll talk more about that as we go through the process, but that's one type of information that's useful. We'll talk more about different types of information that's created in a little while. But right now, I'm just going to go through the legislative process. So step number one, the bill is introduced. Step number two, the bill is assigned to the appropriate legislative committee. Both the House and the Senate have legislative committees. There's examples are Committee on Natural Resources, the Finance Committee, Foreign Relations Committee. So committees that each committee deals with bills dealing with a specific type of subject, and which committee the bill is assigned to will be determined by the subject of the bill. So bills in the committee. Step number 3, the committee decides whether to advance the bill. Now, this is a really important step. Most bills that are introduced in the Congress never become laws. Only a small percentage of bills that are introduced in the Congress become laws. And the bills that don't become laws, what happens, the reason they don't become laws is because they're not advanced in committee. So each bill is assigned to a committee, but in order to proceed to becoming a law, the bill has to advance out of committee. If the committee advances the bill, it doesn't guarantee it's going to become a law, but that's an important step. If the committee doesn't advance the bill dies there. So if you read about congressional action and you read about different congressmen and congresswomen being the committee chairs, that's why that's such a powerful position, because the chairs of the committees have a big say in which bills advance and which bills do not. Okay. Step number 4, if the committee decides to advance the bill, the committee can hold hearings on the bills to collect information. Step number 5, if the committee votes to move the bill out of committee, they can issue a report explaining why they are supporting the bill. So that committee report explaining why the committee reporting the bill, very important part of legislative history. Step number 6, the bill is presented to the entire chamber for voting. Legislators can comment on the bill. Comments made on the chamber floor are recorded in the congressional record. This is the debate on the floor of the House or the Senate, recorded in the congressional record. Also, another very important part of legislative history. Excuse me for a second. Step 7, if the chamber votes to approve the bill is moved to the other chamber and the process is repeated. So if the bill passes the House, the bill then is sent to the Senate and has to go through the same process and be passed by the Senate. So it's a long process of creating a bill, which, if you think about it, is a good thing. Ultimately, that's after, I've dealt with legal research and legislative research for a long time. And the conclusion I've come to over the years after working with it and learning about it is it is a good thing that it takes a lot of time and effort for a bill to become a law. So the bill, so step number 8, if both chambers vote to pass the bill, but the versions are not identical, a conference committee is convened staffed by legislators from both chambers. The conference committee tries to draft a version of the bill that will be acceptable to both chambers. And then the conference committee may issue a report explaining its actions. Conference committee report, if one exists, also a very important part of legislative history. So if there is a conference committee, their version of the bill is sent back to both chambers. But ultimately, step number 10, once both chambers pass identical versions of the bill is sent to the president. Step 11, if the president signs the bill becomes law. The president can also veto the bill. Then, okay, so at this point, the bill has become law. Every bill that becomes law is given a public law number and published in a publication called the Statutes at Large. That's the official Statutes at Large is an official, the official publication of all bills that have become law. It's still important. It's less important than it used to be. What I mean by that is if you have the text of the public law, that's the most important thing. And those are posted in various locations. But I'll just leave it at that. If you have access to an electronic or print version of the Statutes at Large, that's the official publication location of all bills that become law. So the Statutes at Large publish the laws sequentially. So, for example, last year was 2003. The volumes is the Statutes at Large. publish all the laws that were published in 2023, I should say. That's helpful for locating laws that were passed in 2023. That's not helpful in locating what the current law of the jurisdiction is, what the current federal law in a matter is. If you need to locate what the current federal law in a matter is, you want to use a resource called the United States Code. The United States Code, the new laws are incorporated into the United States Code. Repealed or expired laws are removed from the United States Code. We're going to talk about the United States Code a little more in a minute. So, sample federal law citation for a bill that became a law this is one that I found that was passed a couple years ago. The title of the bill is the Big Cat Public Safety Act. It deals with regulating the sale and commerce of lions and tigers, big cats of that nature. It puts regulations on the sale and the keeping of those lions for the keeping of those animals for the purpose of public safety and for the purpose of protecting the animals as well. HR 263, that's the HR stands for House of Representatives. 263 is the bill number. So altogether, this is the bill number, HR 263. Then its public law number, as it became a law, public law number is 117-243. What that means is it was passed in the 117th Congress. We're currently in the 118th Congress. There's a new Congress every 2 years. So we're in the 118th Congress. This bill was passed in the 117th Congress. It was the 243rd law passed in the 117th Congress. So as you deal more with federal research, you become more familiar with these numbers. But finding the bill number and or the public law number makes your research a lot easier. And in today's world of the internet, it is relatively easy to find the public law or bill number of a law that you're interested in. Okay, at this point, I want to go back to the slides. So I'm here, and let me turn on the slideshow again. Okay, that was the federal legislative process. So types of information published by the legislative branch, we've just talked about this. Federal legislative history information, those are the texts of the bills, the committee reports, the congressional record entries that I just mentioned. Also the statutes at large. Statutes, I missed a T there. I have statutes at large. Sorry about that. The statutes at large, as I said, that's a sequential publication of all the laws. Oops. Sorry about that. Sorry about this. Not quite sure. Anyway, I'll get back to where I was. Sorry. There we go. Statutes at large, sequential publication of all the laws that have been passed, and the United States Code, which is useful for determining what the current law, what the current federal laws are. So, as we talked about, federal legislative history information, including text of bills, committee reports, congressional record entries, conference committee reports, text of laws. An excellent place to find these, to find this information is the Congress's website at www.congress.gov. Let's go there. Okay. I think Congress has done a really good job of making information available on this website. I'm not going to talk about the history too much, but I worked in law libraries for a long time, and I got into librarianship at a really good time because the internet in 97 or in the mid 90s was just starting to be used for educational purposes. So I've seen, I'll cut this short. I've seen this this website develop over the years from something that wasn't all that helpful to something I think now is very helpful. So we have the information. Sorry, let me start by saying that if you look at this, if you look at this website, I'm not going to spend time going through all the information that's available, but pretty much all the information that's created by Congress is available through this website. Um, if you're all interested in federal legislative history research, highly recommend just spending some time poking around and exploring this website. There's a lot of information, and I think it's very well done. But what we're interested in is finding legislative history information about the Big Cat Public Safety Act, which I mentioned before. So what I'm going to do is go to, as you can see, you can search by words and phrases. So I'm going to put in Big Cat Public Safety Act. And we know that was from the 117th Congress. So I'm going to select that. And that's it. If you had the bill number, you could search it there. And I won't go through that. But there are various ways you can search. But this is the way, since I have the law title, this is the way I'm going to search. Great. 3 results, which is fabulous. So these are the different bills that 3 different versions of the Big Cat Safety Act, which ultimately became law. Just because I played around with this, I know this is the one we're interested in. HR, House Representative Bill number 263. Take a look at that. So this is the website for our law. Does a very nice job of collecting all the information concerning the law. Tells you who the sponsor was, when the committee meetings took place. But right here, it links to a committee report for the law. For purposes of time, I'm not going to pull it up, but very useful resource to look at. Public law, the latest action on this law, it became a law, gives you the public law number there. If you click on that, it would bring up the text of the law. Gives you a summary of the law here. The other thing I want to show you is actions. This is really helpful for legislative history purposes. So if you scroll down to the beginning, this bill was originally introduced into the House on January 11th, 2021. And this goes through everything that happened to the law. Most of the entries don't include hot links, but when there is useful information, it does include hot links. So here on July 22nd, 2022, the Committee on Natural Resources issued a report on the bill, which explains why they supported the bill. And then the debate on this law was on July 28th, 2022. And there are links to the debate right here. Those will be links to congressional record entries. Very useful. Another link to congressional record entry. But it goes through everything that's happened to the law. As you can see, it went through the House, and once passed by the House, it had to go through the Senate. Its journey through the Senate was shorter, but it did have to go through the Senate. Then eventually became a public law. So for legislative history purposes, the congress.gov website is very useful. I highly recommend it. There are databases in Nexus Uni and Westlaw Campus, which are available, as you know, available to many universities. At Pitt, we have Nexus Uni. We don't have Westlaw Campus, but Nexus Uni is very good. You can find public law databases there, but I recommend using I recommend using the congress.gov website first, certainly, to find legislative history information. It's I think it's relatively easy to use once you get used to it, and it's very helpful. Okay, let me get back to, come on. Oh man, sorry. Oop, no, I don't want that. I'm sorry, I have the situation where the Zoom controls are covering over my tabs at the top of my page. I'm trying to get them to go up. Let's try this. Not what I wanted. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry about this. I'm going to stop sharing and then start sharing again. Huh. Oh man, it's something. Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. Um to sorry if you give me just a minute here. Somehow I seem to have deleted maybe what I was working with, but I should be able to solve this problem in just a moment. I am sorry about this. Okay. Okay. I know this looks different, but it's still the same information. Okay. So this is where I'll just leave it at this. This is where we last were. So we're talking about legislative history information. United States Code, as I've talked about, all current federal laws arranged by subject. New laws are incorporated into the code. Repealed laws are removed from the code. Sample citation, 16 USC 3372. 16 is the title. The 3372 is the section. This is a resource to use if you're trying to find current federal laws on a topic. So there are different versions of the US code available because of the time limits here. Well, we can at least look at the official version. But let me talk about them first. There's the official version posted on the House website, which is, it's easy if I pull it up. As I mentioned there, it has limited annotations. What I mean by that is there's a version of the US code available on Westlaw campus and Nexus Uni. And they both include full annotations. The annotations are summaries of cases and law review articles that talk about the section that you're interested in. That can be very helpful. The free version on the House website doesn't include that information, but it's still a great resource. it does show you how things have when the law was passed and how it's been amended over the years. I think the section I wanted to look at was 163372. Yeah. So this is the actual section of the law that the Big Cat Law was incorporated into. So as the title indicates, it goes over prohibited acts regarding fish and wildlife. But I want to show you that's actual text. If you look at the bottom, it will explain how this law has been amended over the years, which can be helpful in the research process. Okay. Let me get back to the slides. Okay. So that's it for the federal legislative branch. A lot of information there. Again, I apologize about the mix up, but period. So the next branch is the federal administrative branch, again, composed of the president and the administrative agencies for our purposes. The president, the administrative agencies listed there. The type of legal research information published by the United States President includes executive orders, proclamations. Both of those are published in the Federal Register. For legal research purposes, the President is less important than the administrative agencies. Most federal legal research of the administrative branch is done through the administrative agencies, but the President, the Office of the President, does issue some important information, I'll say. Type of information published by federal administrative agencies include preliminary regulations and final regulations. Preliminary regulations are published in the Federal Register. Final regulations, and you will see this, are published not only in the Federal Register, but also in the Code of Federal Regulations. We'll talk more about that. So just as in order to understand, in order to research federal law, statutory law, you need to understand the federal legislative process. In order to research federal administrative law, you need to understand the process for creating federal regulations. So I'd like to go through that. I'm going to go through that now. Let me see if I can pull up this document now. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Okay. Okay. So this document, as the title indicates, goes over the process of creating federal regulations, again, via steps. Again, as information is created, I highlighted it. So step one, the agency identifies an issue that needs to be addressed. There are a wide variety of federal administrative agencies, all under the executive branch. So the agency identifies an issue that needs to be addressed. Just briefly that again. Agencies include the Internal Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Defense. All of those ultimately are types of administrative agencies. So step number two, the agency collects information about the topic. These can include hearings and investigations. Step three, the agency drafts preliminary regulations that address the issue. The preliminary regulations are published in the Federal Register. This puts the public on notice that this puts the public on notice of the proposed regulations. A public comment period is set. So the agency will draw up proposed regulations on the topic and publish them in the Federal Register. As we'll see, the Federal Register is a very important part of federal administrative research. It acts as the daily newspaper of the federal executive branch. Anything the purpose of the Federal Register is to put the public on notice of any actions being taken by administrative agencies. Well, let me revise that statement. The purpose of the Federal Register is to put the public on notice of any regulation. One of the purposes is to put the public on notice of any regulations being created by federal administrative agencies. So if you're working in a business that is regulated by a specific agency, somebody in your business is going to be looking at the table of contents of the Federal Register every morning to see if there are any regulations, proposed regulations, or final regulations being published that impact your agency. If you're a researcher and if you're interested in a specific topic, the example I use a little later here is migratory birds. So if you're a researcher interested in regulations concerning wildlife, it's a very simple process. Every morning, every weekday morning, reviewing the table of contents of the Federal Register and see if there are any new proposed or final regulations that you're interested in. So again, the agency will post the preliminary regulations and set a public comment period. Excuse me. As I note there, as I just explained, the Federal Register serves as the daily newspaper of the executive branch. The agency then considers public input. The proposed regulations will specify how the public can provide input, whether submitting input in writing. There also hearings can be held. After considering the public input, if the proposed regulations move on to become final regulations, the agency drafts final regulations. The agency considers the public input, and then in step 5, the agency drafts final regulations and publishes them in the Federal Register. The final regulations take effect once they are published in the Federal Register. So if the government puts out proposed regulations, takes public comment, and then publishes the final regulations, say on April 1st, April 1st is the effective day of those regulations. I'll just leave it at that. What I was going to say is legislation, it's different. But for regulations, for various reasons, this is very important. For regulations, they become official as soon as they are published in the Federal Register. Period. What else do I want to say there? For research purposes, again, as I mentioned, the agency will publish proposed regulations and final regulations. And reading those publications of the proposed and final regulations can provide a lot of useful legislative history type information. Now, this isn't legislation, but a better way to say it is provide a lot of background information. And in addition to the actual regulations, oftentimes the agency will provide a lot of information about what their thought process is or why they're implementing or proposing these regulations. So that's very helpful for a researcher. And as I say there in the note, the publication of regulations in the Federal Register may include information about the process of creating regulations, including feedback from the public. And then step 6, the final regulations are incorporated into the full Code of Federal Regulations. And the Code of Federal Regulations is a compilation of all current federal regulations arranged by subject. So just as the United States Code is a compilation of all current federal laws arranged by subject, the Code of Federal Regulations is a compilation of all federal administrative regulations arranged by subject. To do this quickly for time, but just as an example, a sample Code of Federal Regulations sample code of federal regulation citation, list of birds protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, was published at 50 CFR 1013. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. The 50 is the title, and then the 1013 is the section number. Let's just take a quick look at that. So this is the free online Code of Federal Regulations. Very useful resource. But just as an example, this section lists all the birds that are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which, if you read these treaties have been around since the early 1900s, which in my opinion is pretty great. I don't want to say this. I'll just say this briefly. So this is actually a good example of how legislation and regulations interact with each other. So the treaties, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, says something along the lines of it's important for the United States to protect migratory birds, but it doesn't list what those birds are. Rather, the legislation then gives the power to the agency, the fish, or gives power to a federal agency to do the research and determine what those birds are. And those are the birds that are listed in this section. I won't go on too much about that. Okay. All right, so that's that. Let me get back to the slides. So the Federal Register itself is, all right, so there's the Federal Register, which is the daily newspaper, which reports all of the activities of administrative agencies. Because of time, we're not going to take a look at it, but it's available on Nexus Uni, available on Westlaw Campus. But I think the easiest version to use is the free version available on the Federal Register website. You can sign up for to have the daily table on the free version. You can sign up to have the daily table of contents of the Federal Register emailed to you, which then links to the actual things. So great resource. The actual Code of Federal Regulations also available at Nexus Uni and Westlaw Campus. The advantage of the Nexus Uni and Westlaw Campus is their searching is more sophisticated in some ways. And they're very good resources, but it's also available for free on the website we just saw. Okay, so that's the federal executive branch. I'll just close by saying, that a lot of useful information available on the between the free version of the Federal Register and the free version of the Code of Federal Regulations. There's a lot of great free information available for researchers. All right, the final branch we're going to talk about is the federal judicial branch, which are the courts. When you view legal research between states and the federal and the U.S. courts, you realize that each jurisdiction, I don't want to say this, trial courts, intermediate appellate courts, and Supreme Courts can be called different things in different jurisdictions. So in the federal court system, the trial courts are the U.S. district courts. The intermediate appellate courts are the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals. So you have the district courts, which are the trial courts, and then the parties are guaranteed an appeal to the intermediate appellate court. Those are the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals. And then you have the U.S. Supreme Court above that. U.S. district courts, each state has one or more federal districts. Pennsylvania has 3 federal districts. Sample citation for a U.S. District Court case is Branch versus City of Philadelphia. 637 F3D 247. That stands for volume 637 of the Federal Supplement 3rd Series, page 247. The citation tells you this is in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania in 2022. The federal supplement, all the different editions, is the official reporter for the federal district courts. U.S. circuit courts, they're the intermediate appellate courts. There are 13 circuit courts in the United States. Each circuit encompasses several states. Pennsylvania's in the Third Circuit, along with New Jersey, Delaware, and I can't remember right now if there's another state, and then Puerto Rico, I think. But there are 13 circuits throughout the United States. Sample citation there, Goldberg versus Pace University, volume 88 of F4th. That's the Federal Reporter, 4th series, page 204. This case came from the Second Circuit came out of New York. It's important to list that as I mentioned, each circuit encompasses more than one state. In December of 2023. Yeah. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States, here's appeals from federal courts and some appeals from state courts. Sample citation, the famous Bush versus Gore case from 2002, which is volume 531 of the U.S. reports, the official reporter, page 98 there. So as far as locating U.S. court opinions, this is for the legislative history information and the for the legislative branch information and the executive branch information. There's good free information available posted by the government. That's not the case with the court opinions. At least there's not as much good free information available. Court websites post some recent opinions, but it's not comprehensive enough. So I'll cut to the chase here. If you're doing research, if you want to research federal court opinions, the best resources to use are the Federal Court Opinion Database on Nexus Uni and the Federal Court Opinion Databases on Westlaw Campus. Those are great resources. Google Scholar does allow, Google Scholar does have a database of federal courts and state court case law, but it's uncertain how complete that database is. And Google isn't forthcoming when asked questions about how complete it is. Google doesn't say, yes, this is complete. I think it's fair. I don't want to be too critical, but it's fair to say they're not forthcoming about how complete the database is. So if you're working with someone or yourself, if you're working with someone or you yourself want to do federal case law research, you have access to either Nexus Uni or Westlaw Campus, using one of their databases is the best approach. For U.S. Supreme Court cases, it's a little different. You can certainly find the opinions, but frequently you find the individual opinions. But if you want a database to search, using the 2 subscription database is the best approach. In that, excuse me for just a second. I want to get back to, I'm in the same situation. Okay.
Just to let you know, you have about 8 minutes left for presentation and questions.
Yeah, thank you. Here's the stuff I was looking for. In the document package that will be sent out to everyone, includes this page, which is types of federal legal research information. I'm not going to go through it, but it goes through all the different things I've discussed today, or I've talked about today, I should say. Information created during the legislative process, information created during the creation of federal regulations and court databases. It also goes through several useful resources that I located talking about the legislative branch, research, executive branch research, and judicial branch research. So that's it. I know this was a bit rushed. There's a large amount of information available. I'm glad I got through it. I'm glad I got through it, period. Um, again, this was an overview, um, but I hope that uh, I hope that this presentation was helpful to give you an idea, at least some bit of a picture of. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. A bit of a picture of federal legal research and period. I'll leave it at that. So it's 2:54. I would certainly be happy to, let me get the chat up here. I had it up. I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions. Now here we have some in the chat, which I will respond to. Where can we find information from 1874 to 1950, since it looks as though you can't find it on the official congressional website? So, Paul, is that information, what type of information are you looking for?
I noticed when you're going through the congress.gov, look up a different the history of the different laws and what were being passed.
Right.
The options did not included basically every year except those years.
That's fascinating. So then in that situation, the resources for that would be, practically speaking, here's the best approach. Contact your friendly local law librarian and see what that is available to them, because there are resources that existed in those periods when everything was in
Right.
print that there's a good chance the law library would still have that. I can't, there's a concept called the serial set. Then there's another print resource that West used to publish that did a very good job of publishing the text of the law and then reports that went along with it. So there are options available for that. I don't know why. That's interesting. I didn't notice that. I don't know why there's a gap there. Maybe they're working on it, but there are definitely print resources available. If you, rather than me going on about it, if you contact your local friendly law librarian, they'll be happy to talk with you about that. But I can't say, I don't want to completely dodge the question. I can't say, there definitely are print resources that can be helpful to that.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Similar to Paul's question, what makes something historical? The one filter. Yeah, that's a good question. I think if it's not current, it would be historical. Sometimes historical is used to, like, just for example, they'll index and create behind the scene text of everything for the past 50 years, right? And then for everything long older than that, they then apply the term historical to it. So basically, that term is created by whoever created the database, making a decision to put, I don't want to criticize anybody, but they didn't put as much time in indexing and creating text for that material as they did for newer material. But as I mentioned, there are resources available. There is there is good information available for the older material. And the best, just practically speaking, the best way to locate that is contact your law library, um, academic, typically academic um, or public law library, and they'd be happy to talk to you about how you can get access to that information. Sorry about the mix-up there. Pause the recording. Do many law libraries still collect these in print, or is it just generally online? My impression is, I've been out of law libraries for 6 years now. I would say most of what's being created in print now is being created by the government printing office. West and Lexis don't, or whatever you want to call it, Nexus, or their parent company, they don't create much legislative history information in print anymore, or any of the things I've mentioned other than cases. So I'm getting closer. Emily, were you referring to cases or executive branch material or,
Kind of both, I guess. Less.
oops.
And you left.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting.
That's
Oh, there she is.
I guess the powers that be didn't want me to ask that question.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Kind of both. Less the executive materials. I mean, as you were saying, there are fewer of them than there are congressional resources and judicial resources. So more like the federal register, the U.S. Code, and the legal resources. Like, do people still collect those in print, or did they just, use the online resources?
Broad statement for current material, less libraries are collecting less and less things in print. Um, the main advantage of print, well, libraries are collecting less and less things in print because typically the electronic versions are searchable and just easier to use and provide much greater access. So as a broad statement, less and less things are being collected in print. A large academic law library, a great research institution like Penn State or Pitt may make their own decision to continue to collect some things in print just to have it for historical purposes. But for the most part, um, they are relying on other people to keep the print and the areas that they used to use to house the print are now being turned into Starbucks. Okay. And that's 3 o'clock.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And in the for the sake of time, I just want to go ahead and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Peter, for presenting. And I'll be sending out a link to the survey very shortly. And reminder, the recording will be available early next week through the website. If you are not a PALA member, you're interested in becoming a member, please feel free to contact us and I'll have the appropriate person contact you. And I also invite you to contact me with your suggestions for future discussions and presentations. I most definitely invite anyone to contact if you want to present. And I wish you all a very good day. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.